the best fantasy books you didn't hear about on Booktube. So I've been wanting to make this video for a while because if you are a Booktube watcher, then you realize that there's this thing that often happens where a famous Booktuber might start reading a book and then other creators will read that book, and then before you know it, everyone talks about the same books again and again and again, and then obviously as time goes by, new books will come into the picture. But I feel like at almost any point in time, there's around maybe 20 or 30 books that are really, you know, in everyone's head on Booktube, and then obviously that changes over time. So today I want to talk about some books that I personally haven't really seen anyone talk on Booktube. Obviously, if you search for any of these books on YouTube, I'm sure you'll find some videos talking about them. So I can't guarantee that you've never heard anyone talk about these books, but these are at least books that I haven't really seen anyone talk on Booktube that I think deserve so much love. First up, we have Station 11. So this is a really, really popular book. I think it won some prizes, even had a dedicated series adaptation that came out around 5 years ago that I haven't watched, but I actually read this book around 6 months ago, and I do have a theory why no one talks about it, but I really, really enjoyed this book. So based in this book, we're set in a post-apocalyptic future where a huge pandemic has happened and almost everyone has died. And I think a reason why probably a lot of people don't enjoy it is simply because that book kind of reminds everyone of something that happened relatively recently in our time, and no one likes to enjoy what happened, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. But there's so many things I loved about this book, and I haven't really seen many, or actually I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about this book on Booktube. And I only really picked it up because Vera, a fellow Booktuber, loves this book. I also ended up loving it. So why did I love this book? Firstly, it's a standalone, which is quite rare. Also, I should say it actually isn't fantasy. It's more like a near future sci-fi. But yeah, love standalones because a lot of series are just so crazy long. I found the writing to be incredibly compelling. But in a lot of ways, this book almost reads like an art piece, because we're set in this world where, you know, almost everyone in the world has passed away, and we're following this group of people that are trying to keep art alive. I think they're called the Shakespeare Troupe or something, and they travel around and they try to spread art and try to keep this beauty that comes with being human to other people, even though almost everyone has passed away. And what I found so fascinating is that firstly, the narrative is not non-linear in any sense. We kind of begin in the past, and then we jump into the future, and then we jump into the past again with another person, and then we go back in the future, and the plot is very non-linear. But in a lot of ways, this book is almost a meditation on the importance of art and beauty, because there's this phrase in the book that gets repeated quite often that is, survival isn't enough, or is it survival is insufficient? And it's basically this sentence where they hammer this point home that we're rebuilding society just isn't enough. We also need to bring back the beauty and what makes you and me being humans. Really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend it. Book number 2 is a book I actually posted on my channel. I posted a dedicated review, I think around 6 months ago. So if you do watch my channel, then you have heard about this book on Booktube, and I'm sure some other people have spoken about it. But that is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, which came out in 2004, I believe, so almost 2 decades ago. Yeah, more than 2 decades ago. And yeah, this book blew my mind. It was genuinely one of my favorite books I have ever read, and it is just crazy. So what makes this book so unique is that also it's maybe more sci-fi again. I do apologize. I think sci-fi and fantasy often blend so much. But what makes this book so incredibly unique is that it has this Russian doll format, as they call it. So when you're reading this book, the book starts with a story where we're set in the, I think it's the 18th century or something, so like 200-300 years in the past. And when we get to around halfway of that story, we just jump into the future, and suddenly we follow a different story that's set around 100 years in the future. And when that story has come halfway, we again jump further into the future and read half of his story, and that keeps on going until we get to the story, I think number 6. Then we have the full story in the middle, and then we go back and we read the second half of the story you read right before, and then we go further into the book, and then we read the second half of the third story, if that makes sense. So basically the way the book works is that as you're reading, you go further and further into the future, and at the halfway point, we start going back into the past. So we're reading 6 different stories that have different writing styles. Like one is like a diary entry, one is like really weird writing because humans have almost forgotten how to speak, one is like really accessible writing, one is really like lyrical prose, and all these stories, they link together, and it is just masterfully done. It's absolutely mind-blowing what David Mitchell has done with this book. And at the heart of this novel is this analysis of how our actions, they ripple through time long after we're gone. And yeah, it's just a masterpiece. I would really recommend that if you pick up this novel, try to read it quite quickly, because you will forget a lot of the details from different stories because of this format. But it genuinely blew my mind, and I would highly recommend it. And as I said, I have a full spoiler-free review if you want to know a bit more about it, because yeah, this book is a masterpiece. Next up, we have Mythago Wood. So this is also a novel I have talked about on my channel. So this is actually the book that Joe Abercrombie recommended when I asked him for a book recommendation, because I think this book won, was it the Nebula? It won some award in the 80s, and yeah, I had never heard about this book, and I read it, and I ended up absolutely loving it. At the heart of this novel is a mysterious wood, which I feel is such an underutilized setting in fantasy. And I won't give away much more detail, but if you like beautiful writing, and if you enjoy stories where there's a lot of like really weird mystery, a lot of like myth blended into it, and novels that have like a really strong atmosphere throughout it, then you need to check out this book. I absolutely ended up loving it, and I feel it's so underrated. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about this book on Booktube, and it became one of my favorites of last year. And then the next book is another fantasy standalone, and this one is fantasy, I promise. But that is To Ride Hell's Chasm by Jenny Words. So this novel was crazy in a lot of ways. Firstly, if you know anything about Jenny Words, and also she's not an author that you hear that much about on Booktube, but she's known for having a kind of writing that is really challenging. It's really dense. In a lot of ways, it often feels like her books were written maybe 200 or 300 years ago, because her descriptions are so over the top. She uses a lot of really weird words. It kind of feels like she had thesaurus open when she wrote her books, and she just constantly tried to find synonyms for all the different words, because there's so many words that I didn't understand. But for me, as I read more and more of this book, around 50 pages into it, I started really vibing with it, and I started feeling so immersed in the whole story. And one of the key reasons why I started feeling so immersed is because of the writing. A huge pet peeve of mine is that when I read fantasy books that are apparently, inspired by a lot of ancient mythology and lore and stuff like that, and you read about a story that's set in this really grand, different alien setting, and then everyone just speaks like you and I do today, that can often really take me out of the immersion. But for this novel, the writing really felt like it fitted that other world setting we were set in. It felt like we were in a medieval world that was also fantastical, and I would have expected people to speak kind of like this in that setting. Another thing that I really enjoyed is that at the heart of this novel is a murder mystery, but as the plot goes on, we start to realize that there's a lot of other things going on here. It's a really, really solid fantasy standalone. It will definitely take some brain capacity to get through, but if you're able to push yourself through it, I think you will absolutely end up loving it. Also, Jenny Words is just super, super nice. Next up, and I'll be very brief here, but I think that all of Tom Dombrell's books, so I'll actually recommend his most recent one, A Killer and a King, is also super, super solid if you're looking for, again, a fantasy standalone. So this is, I think, it's only around 250 pages or something like that. You can literally read this book in 2-3 days because there's not that much text on it, and Tom Dombrell just has a really accessible writing style. But yeah, this is a fantasy whodunit, and if you're a fan of that, you need to check out that book. Next up, we have Seasons of Albadone, and in some ways this book is kinda similar to Cloud Atlas, but also it's very different in so many ways. But it's similar in a way that this is also an anthology, so it's 4 different short stories, and they are kinda independent of each other. But what I found so fascinating is that, the first story, at the end of that story, something happens that then has an impact on the second story. So even though the second story has new characters, a kind of a new setting in some ways, a new plot, it's really crucial you read them in that order, because some of the events that happen and the impact on the world has huge ramifications for story number 2, and the same thing is for story number 2, has huge ramifications for story number 3, and so on. And I just found this to be such an incredible fairy tale kind of fantasy. If you enjoy that vibe, scary forest, fairy tale kind of stories that will just really get you feel super immersed in a world, then you need to check out this book. And yeah, just as I said, I haven't really read that many short story collections or anthologies where the story is kind of interlinked, and I just found it to be super well done here. And also, that is also a relatively quick read, so you can read that quite quickly. Would highly, highly recommend. Alright, and next up we have The Combat Code. So I have heard at least Patrick Leo talked about this book once, but this is also one of those novels that I haven't really seen ever on Booktube. I've only read the first book, so this is actually the first book in a trilogy, but I don't know if I was just in the right mindset when I picked up this novel, but I ended up loving it. So if you are a fan of a good underdog, and if you enjoy fantasy that kind of blends, futuristic settings with fantastical elements, then this is the novel for you. So there's so many things that I really enjoy about this novel. Firstly, I've already mentioned it, but I love a good underdog. Secondly, it has a really great mentor figure. Thirdly, I found the setting to be super fascinating, and then this world building mechanic that is in this world I just loved, and I have to just briefly tell you about it. So basically in this setting, we're set in a world where nations or societies are at war with each other, but the way you actually resolve those conflicts, if you can't do it through, politics or discussion, is that you do it in a duel. So, if my country and another country has a big conflict, we can resolve it by nominating one person from my country, and they will nominate one person, and they will resolve it in a duel. And that is a way that they limit how many people get killed when they have these huge conflicts, or that could end up in a huge conflict. And we don't follow this character as he's on this path to become one of these people that, will probably duel in the future. I really need to continue the series because I love the first book. It actually took me out of a reading slump because the pacing is so fast, the writing style is great, and it just felt super fresh and unique. So I would highly recommend this one if you haven't read it yet. Alright, I have 4 more book recommendations, and then I'll go a bit quicker here. So the first one I want to mention here is We Ride the Storm by David Batson. Again, I don't think I've ever heard any booktuber talk about this book, and this is the first book in a quartet, and yeah, I have to confess, I've only read the first book, which you might think is not a good sign, but I don't know why I didn't continue the series, because I absolutely love the first book. This felt like a really interesting take on grimdark fantasy, basically set in a world where an empire is on the brink of a huge, rebellion or revolution, so that does sound familiar, and we follow, I think, 3 different POVs as they, try to navigate the setting, and the setting felt so unique, the writing style was super interesting, and yeah, this is just like gritty, brilliant grimdark fantasy. So I would highly recommend this if you're looking for a hidden gem, because again, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about this, and I love these covers. These covers are so sick. Next up, if you're looking for some self-published fantasy, then I would highly recommend Seeds of War. So this is also a grimdark kind of fantasy, and one thing that really makes this novel unique is that it has so many fantastical creatures, but none of them are dragons. So this also makes this book feel just a bit different. But another thing here is that if you buy the physical copy, and I know this is such a minor thing here, so most people might not appreciate it as much, but if you buy the physical copy, there is not that much text on each page, which means that when you're reading this book, you will constantly be flipping the pages, which then adds to that reading experience where you feel like you're reading way more than you actually are. And for me, psychologically, I always appreciate stuff like that, because whenever you sit down to read, I think the worst feeling ever is that if you feel like you read for ages and then you only read like 5 or 10 pages. But with this novel, you will actually have read, 30 or 40 pages in the same time span, only because you're flipping that often. But yeah, that's obviously not related to the story at all. But this novel also has a super interesting magic system that's related to smoke. And also in the story, you'll be introduced to so many ancient secrets. And yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, and I would highly recommend it. And also the novella is also really, really good. And then I have to mention Hellmouth by Giles Christensen, or Giles? Giles. It must be Giles, right? This novel is less than 100 pages. So this is a medieval horror novella, and it will terrify you if you're into stuff like that. But it's so, so good. I don't really want to give anything away here because it's that short, and most of you will absolutely love it, I'm sure. So if you're in a reading slump, you need something short, you want to read a medieval horror, which I had never done before this, then this is the book you need to try. And then lastly, if you watch my channel for many years, then you have heard me mention this book on some other videos, but that will be The Councillor by E.J. Beaton. So I think originally this was supposed to be a trilogy, but I don't think that book 2 or 3 are ever coming out for some reason, which is a huge shame because I love the first book. The good news is that I think that you can very much read the first book as a standalone. The first book will give you a very satisfying plot. Listen to me, this is why you need to read it. Firstly, it's criminally underrated, but if you are a fan of political fantasy, then this is genuinely one of the best political fantasies I have ever read. It is so incredibly character driven, and you have so many scenes where people are sitting in courts in different rooms and they're discussing political matters in this empire as it's starting to crumble. So basically what this book is about this character called Lysander, who is really close friends to the queen, but when the queen then gets assassinated, and that's not a spoiler, that's literally so early on, she's appointed as the councillor, which means that she has to choose the next monarch, and there's 4 different people she has to choose from. But then this invites her into this huge crazy political drama where she has to navigate so many different things, and then on top of that there is this other threat outside of the kingdom that is also looming, and oh, it is so good. If you enjoy good character work, you enjoy good politics, you need to check out this one. And again, I'm not sure if I've ever heard anyone talk about this book. It is so, so good. Okay, so that's it. I also mentioned Illborn, check out Illborn, but yeah, I'm sure you probably have heard about Illborn. At this point, I'm currently reading book 3. It's really good. But yeah, if you want to know my thoughts on what modern media gets wrong, then check out this video. And at the very end, I just want to say a special thanks to all my patrons who support me. And also, if you want to join my book club, then you can go to the link down in the description and join it on Fable. It's totally free. I would love to have you there.